Hey y'all, so it is no secret that over the past year or two I haven't been reading very much, and I've been kind of in a reading mood lately, and I decided that in 2019, rather than trying to read a lot of books, I'm gonna try to read all of my big books. I realized maybe like a year ago that I have never given a big book a bad rating, ever. If you go on my Read shelf on Goodreads and look at all the books that are 500 pages or more, I've given every single one of them 4 or 5 stars, except like Twilight, but honestly at this point I think Twilight might still have 4 or 5 stars because I loved it the first time I read it because I didn't understand. 14-year-old Kristen was a mess. And that's really the main reason that I've decided to make 2019 the year of the big books. I set my Goodreads challenge to 20 books, and that's honestly more than I've read in a single year for the past 2 years. And as far as books over 500 pages, I want to read 1 per month in 2019. Now I really don't care if it is actually like 1 every single month, just 12. 1 for each month of the year, even if it's not 1 every single month. That said, I would prefer 1 per month, but I really don't care. So I went on my Goodreads and on my TBR shelf, and I made a new shelf for books over 500 pages that are on my TBR. And the funny thing about that shelf is that it happens to be some of the books that I most want to read. There are some that are under 500 pages that I'm really excited about, but looking at this list of books over 500 pages, these are some of the ones that I am most intrigued by and most want to get to. And to be honest, over the past 5 or so years, I've really been neglecting these big books on my shelves. And I really think that BookTube played a big part in that because when I first started watching BookTube videos and making BookTube videos, it was still very much the mindset of read as much as possible, and everyone was setting their goals at like 100 books. And it was pretty competitive. It's chilled out a little bit, but it's still a little bit like that. I'm rambling. And additionally, I feel like people a lot of times on BookTube talk about kind of a fear of big books, partially because of the quick competitive nature that it used to be, but also because like a lot of people seem to be really intimidated by big books. And until I watched BookTube videos, I didn't really feel that. I don't know, until watching BookTube videos, I was never intimidated by big books. And I think that thought process and mindset started invading my own mind, and I'd be like, ooh, that book's really big. I'm not sure I want to read that. It's kind of intimidating. But now that I've kind of been out of the BookTube loop, I'm like, hey, let's read the big books. Let's get to the big ones. So I've been talking too much. Let's go ahead and get to the books on my TBR for 2019, the big books that I want to read. I have more than 12 books on this list because A, I have more than 12 books over 500 pages on my shelf, and B, I want a little bit of flexibility. And also C, maybe I read more than 12. Maybe all 20 of the books that I want to read on my Goodreads challenge end up being big books. They probably won't. I'm gonna read some books under 500 pages, but you know, maybe there are more than 12 that I read this year, who knows. First up is the book that I'm currently reading. I started it in December and wanted to finish it by the new year, but I didn't, so I'm still reading it, and it's gonna be my January book, and that is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. I'm not that far into it. I'm still kind of getting back into the process of actually remembering that I have a book that I'm reading, but this is really intriguing. It's very weird and interesting, and I like it a lot so far. One thing you're gonna see about these books is that a lot of them are very weird and complex, and that's kind of what I'm in the mood for lately, so this is right up my alley. That makes this kind of hard to explain, but essentially this book has multiple different layers to it. Within this book, there is a documentary about this house and some weird things that are happening within the house, and the book is kind of almost an academic essay writing dissertation about that documentary. And then there are also a lot of footnotes from this guy who's editing it and is like going through the files of the person who wrote the dissertation type thing. It's hard to explain. It kind of reads like an academic paper, but like a really fascinating one because it's about this weird documentary. This actually is reminding me a lot of a podcast that I really like called Tanis. It's really weird, and so I'm very, very intrigued. I'm really enjoying this, and I want to finish this soon and actually read it. So That's the plan. Without the indexes or indices, I'm not sure which one's correct. Without those, this book is already 520 pages, but when you add those in, it's almost 700. So this is a pretty hefty one, and it's also a very wide book, so it's pretty big. The next book is also by the same author, and that is The Familiar Volume 1, also by Mark Z. Danielewski. I'm gonna be very honest here. 90% of the reason I want to read this is because it's weird formatting, and also it has multiple interwoven storylines, which I believe are denoted by these colors on the pages. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't read any of it yet, but it just, the format of this is very intriguing, and I think that it's going to be a lot more interesting than just the brief synopsis that you can read on the book. Like, it talks about all these different interwoven plot lines, but it also says that at the very center of it is a story about a girl and her dad getting a dog. Like, clearly there's so much more to this than just that, because this is the first of 5 volumes that are all this same size. So, like, I'm just so intrigued about what this even is, which is the same reason why I was interested in House of Leaves. So especially given that I'm enjoying House of Leaves, I'm just very intrigued by this whole thing, and I'm excited. Also, another with layers and interwoven storylines that is complex. There will be a pattern. And this is like around 840 pages. Here's the big one. Are you ready for it? It is the most intimidating book on my bookshelves, which shouldn't be intimidating because I love big books. And this is possibly the most complex one, and I'm more intimidated because of how complex it is than because of its size. And it's like also known as one of the most intimidating books in the English language, like ever. It's Infinite Jest. To be honest, I know more about this book as a commentary than I do about what the actual plot and story is about. Like, this is known to be like kind of a philosophical commentary on entertainment, and it just intrigues me. And I read the first chapter as part of a tri-chapter book tag, and I actually thought it was fairly approachable. I didn't get into any of the footnotes and crazy stuff like that, but I found it to not be that hard to read. We'll see if that stays the same, but it did for 1Q84, which is why I'm less intimidated about this, because I loved 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami, and I thought it was going to be really like dense and intimidating and hard to read, and I found that that wasn't the case, and I'm kind of hoping that that will be the case for Infinite Jest as well, because both of them are kind of billed in the same way. Like, they're very complex and seen as intimidating with lots of layers, and I'm hoping that the same proves true for Infinite Jest that was true for 1Q84. To be honest, I don't really want to look and see how many pages Infinite Jest is, but we're gonna look. Like 1,070-ish. 1,070, we're gonna go with that. Next up are some smaller ones that just clock in right around the 500 mark, and that is the All Souls trilogy by Deborah Harkness. I'm a broken record with this series at this point. It deals with magic in Oxford and libraries and just all of these things that sound really cool that I love, and I have been meaning to get to it for a while, and these are all, I believe, over 500 pages, just like around the 500 page mark, so definitely on the list, definitely high on the list. I just checked, and every single one of these is over 500 pages. Most of them are just like, maybe like 520, 530, something like that. Next up are Cloud Atlas and The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. Cloud Atlas is around 500 pages, and The Bone Clocks is a little bit over 600. And these are another two that have very complex and interwoven plots that follow a lot of different characters, and that's about as well as I can describe them. Next is The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. This is also the year that I try to read more Murakami, and this is one of his most famous books and also the biggest one that I own. Apart from 1Q84, obviously. I briefly forgot that. While I do plan on getting to a lot of his books this year, this is the only one that does clock in over 500 pages, and again, it's complex. It follows multiple different characters. That, I think, is a theme in not only the books on this list, but also in Haruki Murakami's books. I don't think this is going to be the first Murakami book I get to this year, because I have a list of like the suggested reading order from someone who really loves Murakami, and this is like after a couple of the other books that I have by him, so I hope to read those first and then jump into this one. And this is just slightly over 600 pages. Next up, and back into a slightly less complex section of this list, is books 2 and 3 in the Gemma Doyle trilogy by Libba Bray. And these clock in at about 550 and just over 800 because this book just had to be extra. I'm not big on historical fiction, but I have found that I enjoy it when it's written by Libba Bray and mixed with some sort of fantastical or paranormal elements. And I enjoyed the first book in the series, so I'm very intrigued to continue on. In a similar vein, the next book on this list is Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray, which is the third book in the Diviner series. This is one of my favorite ongoing series, and I have yet to read this book yet, even though it's been out, I think, over a year. So I have the audiobook of this. I need to re-listen to the audiobook of book 2, and I'm very intrigued to continue the series because it sounds very much more ghost-y than the previous books, which sounds super cool. And this one is also around the 550 mark. Next up is a book that I've been meaning to get to for years, and you can see it is not on the shelf where it's supposed to be behind me, and that is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, which clocks in around 600 pages. And I, for some reason, still haven't read this, even though I love Brandon Sanderson, and it's like one of the only adult novels by him that I haven't gotten to. I don't know. It's one of the ones that intrigues me the most from his books, and I need to read this. It's 600 pages, it counts for this, I'm gonna read it. This deals with a city where magic basically goes to die, I believe, and like a prince who has been banished there and is called dead even though he's not dead. I don't fully remember. I read the first chapter of this a couple times and I don't remember much about it, but yeah, Brandon Sanderson's great and I can't wait to read this. Next up is one that I don't physically have yet, but have been meaning to get and probably will be getting within the next few days, and that is Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessl. So this book is over 500 pages. It's by Marisha Pessl, who wrote Night Film, which I love, and it is like some sort of murder mystery set within a school that has a lot of pop culture references, which is like my favorite thing in the world. So very excited about this one. I really need to go to Barnes & Noble and just buy it. I might do that after I film this. Next up are Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy and Lady Midnight and the rest of this trilogy by Cassandra Clare. I'm gonna be real honest right now. I've always enjoyed the Shadowhunter Chronicles. I enjoyed, I think, every book from the first 2 series, and I honestly haven't read these yet because I'm kind of worried I will fall out of love with this world. And I'm gonna set these down while I continue to talk about it because I don't want to hold them. Long story short, over the past couple years, I've kind of fallen out of love with the YA fantasy genre, and I haven't really enjoyed any books I've read from that genre. And I'm slightly worried that'll happen if I read more Shadowhunter books. So that's why I haven't read them and also haven't been in the mood for them because I haven't been in a fantasy mood lately, but I digress. Recently, I've seen people like My Name is Marinez, whose reviews I really enjoy and trust, going through and reading City of Bones and completely disliking it and talking about all of these negative aspects of the book that I didn't notice when I read them, possibly because I was a young child of 17 or 18 and also possibly because maybe my reading tastes have changed since then and like I've become more critical of a reader. But either way, all these things, like me not being in the mood for that genre and me also kind of falling out of love with that genre, and then on top of that, people criticizing the books now several years later, I'm just very worried that if I read more Cassandra Clare, I won't enjoy it. So that's why I haven't read more of her books. And maybe I'm gonna change that this year. These are down lower on my list of books that I wanna read, but who knows? And both of those are somewhere around the 600 to 700 page mark. So there are a few others that I have just on my Goodreads that I don't own apart from the Marisha Pessl book, but this is the last one on this video that I own. I don't think I'm gonna talk about any of the ones that are just on my Goodreads, but I digress. That is book 2 of the Stormlight Archive, and I guess maybe book 3, I'm not sure. Here's the deal. I thought for a while that I wouldn't continue the series, and I still kind of think that, just because A, they're so big, B, if I read them as they come out, I'm going to forget things because they're so big, and C, because I've realized that this, at least from what I've read so far, is a subgenre of fantasy that I don't quite love as much as Brandon Sanderson's other books. And what I mean by this is, yes, his adult works are all high fantasy. all these except for the YA series. Anyway, they're all high fantasy, but this is slightly different in subgenre, and I don't know how to word it because I always get them mixed up. But the way I've kind of split them up, I guess, in my mind is like, this is more like Lord of the Rings, which is like epic high fantasy dealing with like armies and stuff like that. Whereas I feel like Mistborn, for example, is more about an individual or like a small group of people and like smaller individual magical battles versus armies. That's a vast oversimplification of the difference, but that's kind of how I view them and why I have thought and kind of still do think that I might not continue the series. Also, I'm setting this down because it's big and I don't want to hold it anymore. It's well over 1,000 pages, as is book 3, and I just have been very, I don't know about whether or not I'll continue it, and I still kind of am, but it's one of the biggest books I own, if not the biggest one, and I put it on the list because who knows, maybe I will. So that's it for this list. Obviously, there are some more on my Goodreads that I don't own, and also some more that might come out this year that I might be interested in, or more that are already out that I just don't know about yet that I might want to read and add to this list. Who knows? But that is it for this video. Those are the big books that I want to read in 2019. I'm very excited for this year of reading, and yeah, I'm just very hopeful that I will actually read this year. If you want to check out more books that are on that shelf, I don't think there are a ton, but there are some. I will leave that shelf link down in the description. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you on Goodreads. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!